Dobry wieczór, good evening. My name is Agnieszka Lichnerowicz, and first thing, the discussion will take place in English, so that's why I'm talking to you in English. But the most important thing is that I will have a pleasure to be part of a discussion, of a conversation with Professor Aleksander Etkind, whom is the main protagonist, main character in our debate, and I shall introduce him in a second. But what's even better and maybe surprising to many, we also have another guest, whom is Professor Georgiy'em Kasianov. So welcome everybody tonight to our discussion. The inspiration for it, or the main topic, is the book by Professor Etkind, which is Russia Against Modernity, ROSJA KONTRA NOWOCZESNOŚĆ. This is the Polish title, the one that you can look, by which you can look the book for. And Professor Etkind, for the people that obviously know him for his, I think this is the most known theory or concept of internal colonization of Russia, is a professor now at the Central European University. He's a historian. Before, or in the meantime, he was working and cooperating with different universities around Europe, Cambridge among others, and he specializes in, oh, this is a long list, but climate and Anthropocene, and also European intellectual history and imperialism and decolonizations, which are going to be also probably the topics of our discussion. And Professor Kasianos, I may add, is now professor at Maria Curie Skłodowska University in Lublin, Poland, and he specializes in memory or politics of memory. So good evening, dear professors.
Hello.
Hello. So, and for our listeners and viewers, if you would have any questions, please do share them on Facebook. If you have any opinions, please do that as well, and we will try as much as it is possible to include them in our discussion. I guess for the people that are joining us and haven't read your book, Professor Etkind, yet, which may be a mistake, so I would encourage everybody to do so. We could start with a very basic summary of the main thesis, which is actually in the title, that Russia is now having a war not only or not just with Ukraine, but with the modern world and modernity. So it's Russia, it's corruption, authoritarianism, misogyny, climate killing policies, homophobia, and imperialism against modernity. So you have written the book, I guess, about 2-3 years ago. You were finishing it after the big war, Russian big war. What you think you would underline now, especially, and what do you think you would add to your analysis?
Yeah, thank you very much for having me here. And of course, I'm very, very pleased that my book has been published now in Polish, in the Polish translation by Krytyka Polityczna. I actually started writing this book. I know exactly when I started writing it, in February 22, when the first missiles were sent from Russia to Ukraine, and I had an entirely different research project and agenda, but I just felt that I have to write it, because anyway I was reading this kind of news and was thinking this kind of thoughts, and I decided that it would be beneficial just to put this on paper. And the book was published relatively quickly in English, so it was published while the war didn't even reach its first annual anniversary. So So the central thesis of my book, yes, you kind of listed many different manifestations of kind of pathetic state of Russia's state and society nowadays, and politics and policies. And, you know, from corruption to homophobia, indeed, and one could add much more, and imperialism is a huge part of it. And I was trying to summarize, basically, the whole book is about sort of trying to be as broad as possible, but also as concise and sort of narrow, focused as possible. So that was the tension. I imagine this book as a kind of synthesis, but it's a very small book, actually. It's a very short kind of book. I hope it could be read in one evening, well, maybe three. So, yeah, the thesis is that, yes, indeed, Russia is fighting its war in Ukraine. It's war against Ukraine, and it's also a war against modernity. And then, of course, the question is, what is modernity? Nowadays, our modernity is very different from what people in the previous eras in the 19th century or in the 20th century understood by their modernities. So I had to define our modernity. And that took some effort, frankly. And for me, the main feature of this, of the current modernity is, yeah, climate change and all kind of, you know, huge transformations that this climate change enforces on humanity. So it's largely, for me, it's green modernity. And Russia is fighting, you know, with its, you know, full dependence on oil trade and things like that. Russia is fighting in its own interest against this green modernizing world that undergoes whatever energy transition and major transformation. And of course, it would have done it faster and easier. It would be very difficult to do it in a way, but it would have done it easier if there were no this war.
So, but I would ask additionally, if you today, you know, 2 years more, you have experience, we all have experience. What do you think is especially important today to understand from your analysis, from your concept?
I was way too optimistic. I mean, I was shocked like everyone else, or, you know, more or less than many others, but I was shocked. I sort of expected this war, but not as precisely as my kind of profession, as my expertise requires it. I actually remember just looking at Georgi sitting here. I remember how we had a dinner a few months before the war. And I asked Georgi, will there be a war between Russia and Ukraine? And Georgi said, actually, no, there will be no war because there is no motive for this war. He said, I cannot imagine any kind of reasonable motivation for starting this war, you know, for the Russian side. And Ivan Georgi is here, happy to this is happening again. And so he will correct me if I'm kind of lying. But he said, so he said, no motivation. And I said, yes, but there is one motivation. I said, Putin is bored. They are bored. They they want, you know, a new kind of extreme. And this is the sort of way to do that. Georgi, how do you remember that moment?
I will tell.
So Professor Kasianov, please tell. And on the other hand, I think after having read the book, what from your perspective is especially important in Professor Etkind analysis, or where you would argue and disagree?
Well, generally, it's a good book. It's short. It's the first benefit of this book is it is short. However, I split this book on several parts when I read it, because when I started to read, I understood that I will read it too quickly, because I was, you know, when the book is good, you want to read it on and on and on, and then as an experienced reader, I decided that I should stop and should read this book no more than 10, 15 pages once. And then I just, you know, it was like a good meal. You're trying to extend the time of consuming it. So in terms of product, it is very attractive and let's say very tasty. So the second part of this is that, well, it's not the first book of Alexander I read, and I always appreciated. So I'm historian and a bit a political scientist, but Alexander has very different intellectual background. He's a psychologist. He started his academic career as a psychologist, so he has a, well, sometimes very specific perspective, which to me as a historian, very attractive and very different. This means that when people from different disciplines, when they read this book, they would find sometimes unexpected angles, unexpected approaches to the problems, which looks a bit familiar. Yeah, so everybody reads about Russia. There's a lot of different interpretations of Russia, etc. But here we have a very interesting, well, provocative approach to the topic based on the idea of a super exploitation of natural resources, of concentration of benefits of this exploitation in the hands of very small group, in fact, parasitic group, and a use of power of carbons for so new carbon era. So you use power of carbons to transferring this power into power as a power, and then these elites, or how Alexander calls them, so-called elites. He doesn't like this this term. So these parasites at the top of the pyramid. So they how they also distribute the goods which they earned through this the exploitation of natural resources. And but I would just make a short remark about our conversation in December 21 in Florence in a very good restaurant, and I felt that Alexander would want to ask me something, but he probably didn't want to spoil a good evening. But he finally asked me if there would be a war, and I would correct him that I say yes. Well, I said no. It's just I do not expect that it would be a large-scale war. However, then we discussed that if it would be a war, then Putin would come to have a corridor in the south, and then he would want to invade the rest of Donetsk and Luhansk Oblast, etc., etc. So, but that was hypothetical. And I, honestly speaking, I am going back to this conversation more many times after that. And once again, you are speaking to psychologists. So as a historian, I could speak about imperial extension, neo-imperialism, etc., etc. But Alexander said that probably Putin is bored. And if you read this book, you will find this thesis, sometimes probably implicitly, that the guy at the top of the pyramid, of this parasitic pyramid, that this guy really was bored. He didn't know how what's to. He probably decided somehow to deal with he was bored of life, and definitely he had the problems in his closest environment. I mean his entourage, and probably his decision to start war also based on these problems with his close entourage. At least when you looked, when I observed the Security Council of Russia, this famous wired sitting of the council. So then there were people, definitely they were not very much enthusiastic about what happened, what started. So, and then we saw Prigozhin, what he did a year ago. So a lot of different approaches to this, why he started this war. And yes, I accept I was wrong, that I didn't expect that it will be, at least I didn't expect that it would be such a scale. And another notion is that exactly at this time when we were speaking, the war was on. The war started not in 22, the war started in 1914. So it was a frozen stage of this, but nevertheless. So about the book, once again, going back to book, I would recommend to start reading this book from the end. So first read the last chapter. And when I read this chapter, you know, I read first part of this chapter, and then at certain point I put the book aside and then started to read, and then I had electronic version, and I had a sense that probably I'm reading some other text, because this part was about Russian dissolved. So, and then it was a scenario. So I like it very much because it was like a Buñuel movie. So I was in a kind of in the kind of Buñuel movie, inside Buñuel movie, when different kinds of reality just coincide, and you do not know in which part of reality you're living in. And it's very good because, well, that was a scenario. So, Alexander, I would be very happy if this scenario would become a reality. So I hope that you are a Sibyl, and that you're predicting right, because that was about the solution of Russia. I believe that reading this book, I once again got the idea that Russia cannot be a democratic country. Russia can exist only as an authoritarian country, only as a country with this parasitic so-called elite, etc., etc. So to finalize my points about the book, so I would say that it is very good reading in terms of very different perspective. So there's a lot of kind of new notions there, like petrocratia, like parasitic state, not at all new, but particularly in application to Russia, about this this chapter about gender and degeneration. I like this words play. And then about the public spheres, how it shrinked in Russia and how it was in fact turned into, well, in fact, cannot be called a public sphere. It's a kind of well, that's the word public sometimes has certain meaning in Polish or in Russian or in Ukrainian. So I'm stopping this point. Alexander, thank you very much for this book. I definitely advise people to read it. I don't know how it looks in Polish. In Russian, there were obvious signs that it is translation from English. And sometimes, well, interesting things happened to this text. But, well, good luck with this book in Poland.
Thank you. So maybe I could follow up on the motive you underlined, Professor Kasianov. I was actually, I think for Polish readers, this book is also very interesting and intriguing because it looks at Russia, which we discuss a lot here from different perspectives. But I think I know some of this discourse from Ukraine. I remember when big war 2022 started, I've heard so many times from people I know that this is 20th century country attacking 21st century country. Mm-hmm. So I think it's kind of the same way of thinking as yours, although not in every aspect. And then the imperialism and discourse, which is becoming more and more popular in the region especially, but I hope in the West as well, which also Ukrainian intellectuals and politicians are promoting. But you explicitly write in the first month of the war that Russia will lose the war and it will rupture, it will fall down. Do you still believe it? Do you still see the path to it?
Yes, I still believe in that, full-heartedly. Like, I do believe in this. However, I should say that I was too optimistic. When I was writing this book, I thought that I used kind of a particular rhetorical device when I was writing this book, that I wrote the whole text in the past tense. And my calculation was that, okay, I'm not now writing it, so the war is going on, but when the book will reach its readers, well, people will actually read it, the war will probably be over. So that will be all in the past. It's like a horrible past. People would still need to sort it out, to understand it. And why don't I write the whole text in this kind of historical present? And I did that. But of course now, I'm happy to see that you did read my book, but the war is not over still, and it was just a rhetorical device. It didn't it was not realized, unfortunately. So I was too optimistic. But on the other hand, I have never given, when I was talking about the future, which actually happens, as Georgi said, only in the last chapter, because all previous chapter, whatever, 6 or 8 of them are about the immediate, about the very recent past, but largely about the present. And only the last chapter is about the future. And I think that, yeah, now I should respond to Grigori's statement that I am a psychologist. I was trained as a psychologist, but that was like 30 years ago. And I have 2 PhDs in psychology and in cultural history. That's not the point. The point is that was saying that something like my wife is worried, or my husband is worried, or Putin is worried. You don't need to be a psychologist. It's just a pedestrian kind of observation. It could be wise, it could be true or wrong. That's an entirely different thing. During the last 30 years, I practiced history. For some of my colleagues actually think that I'm a historian. Some other people with an even deeper historical memory, they think that I'm a psychologist, which is fine, because in this book, so I really tried. I didn't realize what I was doing, but it came to me like that gradually, that I was trying to just to take a position of a social scientist. Like, what social science at large, like social science, like capital letters. What could it, not political science, not whatever, sociology, etc. There are also, chapters on economics of Russia, on demography, on whatever, media studies, things like that. But it's all kind of this narrow disciplinary takes, they do not give big picture. And I just felt that since the war started, and that's interesting that Grigori is perfectly right, that the war started in 2014, but somehow now we understand it better than it started then, 2014, than say we understood it in 2021. So at war, things are changing, like our perspective on things changes because of the war. And a big war needs a big picture. And this big picture, it has to be interdisciplinary. It has to be like, say, it has to be a social scientific look at the events. And I think, yeah, historians have probably a privileged position for taking this big picture. Also, I'm actually more and more so, I think that historians have a privileged position for thinking about the future. Because history is really about change, unlike academics or sociology. History is all about change. And at war, when we're in war, we understand the speed of this change and its unpredictability much better than when we are at peace. And much of social science actually has been discredited by this war, as I think it was also discredited by the World War I or World War II. Those social sciences that were there, they were designed for peace. They were discredited by war, by every big war in history. So this is a kind of moment that I was trying to depict as a historian of the present. This is what I hope I was doing.
So I will come back to you, Professor Kasianov. The thesis, it's a deconstruction of Russia from different perspectives, and that it's a dysfunctional country with a parasite elite, and it can't live and survive like that for too long. That's why sooner than later, due to Ukraine's resistance and due to nations that are part of federation, these nations' disappointment or frustration or poverty, the country will implode. And you're right that this is the last chapter that is more like science fiction. It's a prediction. But do you also see it this way? That there is no other way for Russia than to implode in some way?
Well, generally, it's well, despite the fact that it's kind of a dream, it's built quite logically. So it built on the old previous system of arguments in the book. At this moment, generally the problem, you know, I don't remember who said this. Probably it was Bruno Latour who said that during the war, two countries were in the war becoming more and more similar. So unfortunately, what is going on in Ukraine is also
Klaus even said that.
Klaus. Okay. So thank you. I just didn't remember. Generally, the wisdom belongs to everybody. So that's generally. When I was reading the book, and I told Sasha about this, that a lot of things are very similar in Ukraine to Russia. We also have the parasitic elites. We also have social groups who, in fact, establish themselves as a kind of early medieval times, or even medieval times elites, which are impenetrable to other social groups, and et cetera, et cetera. So we have a lot of things which make Ukraine similar to Russia. Of course, this similarity based on common legacy, common Soviet legacy, and common history, et cetera, et cetera. So probably, well, to Ukraine, this war is exactly the precondition not to become similar to Russia. So Kuchma wrote a book in 2001. No, well, he didn't write this book. I know who wrote it, but his name is, and Ukraine is not Russia. And that was not just prediction, but not just speculation. Ukraine really different. So Ukraine have similarities with Russia, but Ukraine different from Russia in one decisive point. And this point is that Ukraine wants to be national state, it wants to be sovereign state, wants to be independent state. Russia wants to be empire. Russia doesn't want to be national state. If Russia would going to become national state, it will dissolve, definitely. and very soon. So we have this conflict is not just the conflict between states, it's the conflict between two outlooks, two worldviews, in fact. And another great difference between Ukraine and Russia is that Russia, Ukraine, whatever it would be, but Ukraine praises the kind of, I don't know how to express it, because you know the contemporary selection of words and notions a bit behind the development of situation, but generally people call this liberties. So Ukrainians are sometimes even extremely devoted to liberties. Russians devoted to the state, and this state is parasitic. This state is owned by parasite elites. So when Ukrainians do not agree with state, they go to Maidan and they go to revolution, etc., etc. When Russians do not agree, they go to kill others. So they are volunteering to go to Ukraine and to raise money by killing others. And this is the point. Another point, of course, is that Ukraine never claimed any territories from other states, and Russia does it permanently. So, and this book is, in this case, is very illuminating, because it, you know, what I enjoyed here is that it's kind of anatomy theater. So it's Alexander in the end, Alexander considers Russia to be a dead body, and before that he just well makes. Works like projector, so he just looks at different parts of this body and explains why these parts are dysfunctional. They function, but they, in fact, in perspective, they're dysfunctional. So probably it's his or my dream, but generally, I think that Russia, within this state of affairs, even with having successes or very, well, how to call successes when you kill 1,000 Russians to take a couple of square kilometers of territory. They believe it's success. I believe it's well, it's, you know, this term of Pyrrhus victory. So this is very expensive. They do not count on the number of killed Russians, but well, sooner or later, it's also part of this general approach to the nature. Yeah, that's to explode the nature, explode the human force this way. So probably, well, this book is really good to understand the nature of Russia, contemporary Russia from inside, to understand the nature of this, of evilish nature of this regime and of this guy at the top of regime and all these gerontocrats around this guy, etc., etc. So they do not, these people personally do not have future. They exactly against future, not just against modernity, they against future. They fight against future. And in this sense, reading this book, well, it's a well, excellent idea to understand the nature of this regime and this country.
So to summarize what you have just said, is Ukraine, because of the war, due to the war, because of its resistance, becoming more demoralized in the direction of Russia? You said there are problems there, where there are in every country. I hope we will talk about it in a minute. So it's, the war is demoralizing, obviously, but or is Ukraine becoming more Gaia modernized, so more open to like women, or more less homophobic, more climate friendly, due to also the currents in the West that it wants to use to gain support. So how which direction is Ukraine changing?
Well, that's really challenging question, because first of all, I'm not futurist. I don't know what happened tomorrow, but you want me to tell you what's happened in the next years. At this moment, Ukraine relies on 75% of incomes, well, to operate the war and the country, coming from outside sources. Ukraine lost 20% of territories, about 10 million population. So Ukraine in extremely hard conditions now. And for many Ukrainians, well, they do not think about this kind of things. What will be the future of our country? What will be more open, etc., etc. They just fighting for survival. This existential war, and Ukrainians en masse, well, just fight to be alive. This is the how it looks like. So I cannot now. I cannot. If I would be responsible person, I cannot speculate on how it would, what the path. I definitely can say that it's not with Russia. Ukraine split with Russia for a long time, probably forever, because that's after you have experienced everything which happened to Ukraine, and Russia is the cause of this. I don't think that there would be well, decent people who would think about having something with Russia. Of course, like it can be like in Germany, into Germany's, that they would somehow coexist and even have a trade, etc., etc. But mentally, it's forever apart, definitely. So there will be this portion of population which was pro-Russian or called pro-Russian, etc. This part of population, exactly this part of population destroyed by Putin, because it is eastern and southern regions which were populated with so-called pro-Russian. It's also specific problem. Were they really pro-Russian? So these parts of Ukraine are destroyed, or they are still under the destruction, etc. So, and this depopulated. So, and then finalizing my answer to your question, once again, I would say that Ukraine definitely would never be the same as before this war. However, what would be the path, I don't know. And I have a real sense that Ukrainian ruling class also do not have a real understanding of how it would go and where it would go. But at least two vectors are clear. First of all, it is the vector to the west, or to Europe. And the second one, if we speak about security, of course, it is about joining Euro-Atlantic community. And then if we go from topography to geography, or so then we'll see that Ukraine now is just epicenter of global stand between Russia and their allies, and what we could call the West or Western world. And unfortunately, this is the, I don't want to repeat Huntington's thesis about clash of civilizations, but Ukraine now exactly within the epicenter of clash of civilizations. And in this case, well, Professor Etkind presented one of these civilizations in a very specific manner that makes this civilization extremely unattractive. I mean, Russia, they call themselves now civilization state. So they государство цивилизация. So look at this civilization, and I definitely, any normal person would not make a choice for this kind of civilization. So that's my answer.
Thank you. I mean, blame my English. Of course, I meant the Russian model, not Russia now. Yeah. So, Professor Etkind, the question is, have you idealized this Gaia modernity part of the world? Because it's like a bit of, that's how I read it, but please do correct me. It's a bit like utopia. So all the progressive dreams are on the right track as far as climate is concerned, as far as gender equality is concerned, as far as quality of democratic institutions is concerned. So if you put it the way you describe it, so this Russia anti-contemporary modernity, the alternative is this West that is on the right track. Is it? I mean, don't you feel that this is a much more pessimistic reality than you kind of write in your book as an alternative to Russian model?
Yeah, Gaia modernity is a utopia, and I described it in my book as utopia, which is sort of, which hopefully will turn into reality, and not because somebody wants it to happen, or many people do not want it to happen, but you know, there is nature, climate, whatever, heat waves and hurricanes and whatnot. We had in Vienna, we had Storm Boris. You also had Storm Boris in Poland. So it just happens that people should give their responses, and there is no other response but you know, cutting the consumption of fossil fuels, which largely came to Europe from Russia. And the European Union has accepted, and it happened so that it was just became law of Europe, of the European Union in 2021. There's programs of decarbonization, you know, like halving emissions by 2030 and reducing them to zero by 2050, which actually meant reduction of imports from Russia, you know, proportionally by half and then fully. And that what became the law of the land. Oh, the land was Europe in 21, and the war started in 22. You know, of course, you know, as people say, philosophers say that something happens after it doesn't mean that it happened because of it, but still, you know, it raises some kind of suspicion, so we could produce hypotheses, and of course, in the times of war, we are very sensitive to these coincidences. And I was over-optimistic, indeed. For instance, I did not predict, I saw this full dependence of Russia on European imports of fossil fuel. I did not predict, and I think nobody actually predicted, like, you know, stockbrokers or people who are fully invested in the oil and gas business, they also didn't predict that China and India would take this part of Russian fossil exports, and that they will create together with also some participation of the Europeans, this kind of round way from the Danish Straits across 3 oceans to China and India. And that would be viable, and that the international community, with all its air carriers and whatnot, with all its force and with all its customs and lawyers and accountants, will not be able to enforce the new regimes, say, of oil price cap and other, you know, and sanctions and other measures that the international community imposed immediately after the war of 22 started. But it didn't work, and I could not imagine that this all would not work. I took it, you know, I trusted that. That's my fault. So of course, you know, that doesn't mean that all my sort of analysis is invalid, or like, no, and prediction will not realize. No, it does not mean that. It means that this prediction is deferred, postponed, successfully postponed by kind of some Russian operations, so the Greek tankers and the Chinese greed for oil and things like that. But also it's postponed by the European and American weakness and hesitation and incompetence. And of course, right now we're talking, it's exactly the turning point of history. The American elections will happen just in a week from now, and that will be decisive. I'm still optimistic, but people around me are very pessimistic, and there is no way to judge. But waiting for this week. But it's a turning point between what and what? Basically, between utopia and dystopia. Utopia and anti-utopia. We know a lot. We have read it, a lot in literature, also in Russian literature. The first anti-utopia was written by the Russian author Evgeny Zamyatin. Wonderful text, very, very dark, very, very pessimistic, basically, that he prophesied the horrors of communism when it will be, when it will come true, and this technological progress, if it will not be controlled by whatever ethical values. And basically, that's what we see. So that's a choice between, a decent life that is, of course, has huge problems, like Ukraine has or had even before 2014. And Russia had before 2014 as well, or more, much more than that. But that's between real life that undergoes sort of lots of changes in its interaction with nature. And that could be, with all difficulties and all zigzags, it could be sort of described as a progress. That's a utopian side of things. Progress for us nowadays, a week before the American elections, it sounds like utopia. And the dystopia in which people would be basically victimized by the interests of some oligarchs and in coalition with this sort of entirely new breed of politicians who work like hypnotizers, mesmerizers, which was, of course, a concern of so many social thinkers, starting from the early years of the American democracy, and then, in the late 19th century or 20th century, people were kind of thinking about that there will be some demagogues and whatnot who would suppress the common peoples around the globe. And the only way to resist it is social progress, meaning education, meaning equality, meaning, equality between the low classes and the higher classes, between men and women, between different races and nations, between different states. So the more equal will be the world in the future, those thinkers said. The more educated people would be, the more they will be able to resist to this mesmerizing, the Maguchik ideologies. But somehow, we saw that the First World War happened. We saw that the Second World War happened. That was all about this sort of mesmerizing ideology that sort of deceived the common people. And the common people, like the contemporary Russians, they then and now they are eager to fight, to die, and to kill for the sake of this entirely wrong, very primitive, anti-modern, whatever, anti-progressive ideas. And of course, every time it's like a miracle. What's going on? Like, why all this happen? It should not have happened. Like our teachers taught us that it will never happen. But this does happen. Like that's also reality. That's a clash that, you know, it's deeply in the heart of everyone. And all of us are trying to deal with it somehow, to understand it, to describe it, to explain it. It's always, you know, only partially successful, because a similar situation would probably repeat again. That's it.
Professor Kasianov, yeah, we are talking a week before American elections, and it's even difficult to imagine what it would mean if Donald Trump wins for people in our region, especially in Ukraine, but not only. But if you read the Professor Etkind's book today, where there is this anti-modernistic Russia versus potential of Gaia modernity that can be realized, blossom in the West. I mean, doesn't it seem a bit scary that maybe this anti-modernization camp is actually stronger? And I guess this is also the question of about the disappointment in Ukraine of the West, of what it promises and what it delivers.
You know, when you asked about the you just somehow compared the description of Russia in Alexander's book and the West, and asked about idealization. So I just recalled his another book, which is Природа зла. I don't know if it's translated into other languages, but it is exactly about
Nature's Evil, a cultural history of natural resources. Would be so good to translate it into Polish, of course.
So that's exactly about your question. So that's from about the other part of the picture, and well, that's I have a problem to somehow to connect the book we discussed with the elections in the U.S., but at the same time, well, the U.S. Probably one of the biggest producers of CO2 in the world. So the contemporary administration appointed special envoy for the nature and Mr. Kerry, and I listened to his speech in military academy at West Point. It was a keynote speech, and that was a picture of disaster, of the global disaster. And what we see, any changes in the US policies about environment, of course they do something, but generally they even do not follow Kyoto Protocol. So and if we connect this to the book now, look what's going on. That's asking about the war. Alexander, one of Alexander ideas that Russia, one of the reasons why Russia started this war is that they wanted to keep their monopoly over carbons and to sell them, etc., etc. And they wanted to stop this process of decarbonization of economics, etc., by this war. And in fact, in this case, they're successful. You know that the green programs in the EU are postponed because of the war. And just imagine how many carbons are just spent. And the territory of Ukraine now at the war territories. And just imagine how the soil looks in Ukraine now after at this period, these regions which are affected by the war. Look at Ukrainian cities in Donbass, of what remained of these cities, etc. So this is part of the problem of what Russia doing, is that they not even neglect, not even violate. This is the large-scale crime against the nature, what they're doing. And they doing this relying on their gains from carbons. They have money from this. They're doing this to kill the nature, to kill humans, which are the part of nature. You can learn this about when reading this book. So if we go back to your question about what's changing in the administration, the U.S. administration, I'm not Americanist. I'm not a specialist in American political life, but purely aesthetically or purely intellectually, when I look at what is going on there, I have a feeling that I'm living in pandemonium. It's just neither Mr. Trump, which is, well, I don't know how to call him. I have to be politically correct. But Mrs. Harris also does not look much attractive to me. Moreover, if you look how it's to the dynamics of this, we see the pressure from the U.S. on Ukraine to stop and to make concessions to Russia, territorial concessions to Russia. And I also have a feeling that the U.S. is not really interested in defeating Russia. I have a sense that they want it to keep a certain shape to counterbalance China, because Russia is not a great matter of interest for the U.S. They think about China and about India and about other global South countries. And now this, once again, I'm going back to this idea that Ukraine is epicenter of global conflict. And unfortunately, due to its geographical position, due to 600 kilometers of common border with Russia. So I cannot answer your question about the elections and what would be the outcome. Only I can say, Sasha says that he is a modest optimist. I am a modest pessimist. So, and I see that I don't see any, in fact, I don't see any benefits to Ukraine in contemporary situation. So, and in this contemporary situation, probably the biggest benefit to Ukraine would be if Ukraine will survive this war, will keep its population, and then would have a kind of real guarantees to defend itself against repetition of this. But this is a really the note which I don't know how to unfold it. So let's speak about other things, probably more optimistic.
Yeah, to tell you the truth, that was also my impression when I read the book for the first time. I was amazed by the deconstruction of Russia, and it was very important and interesting for me also as a Pole, because we have certain narratives and they are more historical and maybe less economical or from the climate perspective. But when I was reading it for the second time, I was more focused on what I see in your analysis of Russia, but which aspects or the elements I see as a danger in our or Western countries. So it's kind of a deconstruction of a dangerous country and elite and the regime. So for me, it became more and more pessimistic. So this is also the last chance I will tell if anybody has any questions or opinions that want to share, we can include it now, because we will be going to the end of our discussion. But maybe I don't know, not to make not to produce artificial optimism, but also not to finish the conversation only in this pessimistic mode. So maybe Professor Etkind, which of the aspects of your analysis of Russia, of the construction of Russia, which elements at this moment seem to be most dangerous to Russian empire? So which are the ones that can be the most destructive to the Russian empire soon?
That is the Russo-Ukrainian war. I'm sure about that. There is nothing more dangerous than this war that Mr. Putin launched, and that was his own decision. Yes, indeed, it has become, the Russian war, but it was launched by Putin, in full secrecy. Nobody, no people, no volunteers, whatever, took part in that decision. And that was suicidal for his kind of statehood. And, so yeah, in my book, in the last chapter of my book is very clear, predicts disintegration of Russia. There are different terms for that, but my preferred term is disintegration or defederation of Russia. So the idea is that it would crumble because of economic hardships in the future and political disenchantment, and more, by far most importantly, because of the military defeat, the Russian Federation will crumble into its constituent parts, which are places like Buryatia, Udmurtia, or Chechnya, or Dagestan, or the Moscow region, or St. Petersburg, etc. And of course, we do not know what will happen next. There could be some kind of new coalition, or several coalitions, and of course, these parts would be dependent on its neighbors. Some parts would be dependent on the neighboring Poland, other parts would be dependent on the neighboring China, etc., or Norway, or Iran. But essentially, that would happen, and by far the most important factor is the Russo-Ukrainian war. So, frankly, I don't see any future for Europe or for the world without Ukrainian victory. In this sense, I'm not Ukrainian at all. I have, very good friends in Ukraine, and had some research projects together with Ukrainians, and have some of my students actually teach now. They are professors in Ukrainian universities. I'm proud of it. But I can say nothing, for Ukraine or about Ukraine. But I really believe in its victory not because I love this country. I don't love this country, but just because I see that there is no other chance for the war to survive in the current condition. When it will happen? Will it happen next year? I sort of, in my optimism, I have all kinds of conspiracy theories about why Biden administration postponed the most important strategic decisions and kind of donated it to the Harris administration, so that really good things would happen at the start of the Harris administration. We will see, would it be true or not? But I kind of, in the back of my mind, I believe in this kind of scenarios. But it also could happen in 10 years from now. We don't know that. I mean, that would be absolutely tragic and awful if this kind of war would last for years and years and years, and more countries, whatever, North Korea, South Korea, and many others, would be pulled into this whirlwind, and that will be a global war. It's already a global war, I believe, but it will be a World War III. With the outcomes, that's how our beloved politicians see the outcomes will be unpredictable. But still, I'm an optimist also because I'm sure that Georgi will say because I'm a psychologist, I know that. But I know that I think from dusty historical books, that if you do not believe in victory, you're already losing. So belief in victory is the condition of victory itself.
And on that note, I also believe that any analysis is also creating the reality. There is no neutral analysis. So, to Professor Kasianov, from your perspective, do you think that this way of analyzing Russia, as Professor Etkind proposes, or similar, the one that focus on imperialism and understand Russia's imperialism, but also this internal colonialism or this parasite structure of 98% of the population being not needed for the economy and the state to survive. Do you see this way of understanding Russia, outside and inside, becoming more popular outside of the region in the Western countries? Do you think that this way of understanding Russia is understood by Western, so-called Western, collective West experts?
Well, the collective West is very different. So there's different trends and streams in political science, in sociology, and cultural studies, et cetera, et cetera. But what I see now that this trend, so-called decolonization, they call it decolonization, etc. I have no at this moment I do not have a kind of final understanding of what is it. It's also what we call decolonization studies, which were initiated by to a great extent by Ukrainian scholars who found themselves outside Ukraine. So to some of them, it's just not just, but to a great extent, a matter of finding jobs and finding positions and pressing out Russians from these positions. For many, it's a matter of kind of ideological grounding of what they do, et cetera, et cetera. So there is a lot of different people, streams, so among Ukrainians in the West, among Westerners, in political science, in neo-realist school, in realist school, in constructivist school, et cetera, So different approaches, including those who want to, when they say we want to understand Russia, it's a very good approach. We should understand Russia. We should understand why it functions this or that way. But sometimes this understanding of Russia leads to the next step that we should consent to Russia. So that's, I think that we should understand Russia, we should analyze Russia, but it doesn't mean that we should well, follow Russia in what they do. So, and in this case, this book...
Sorry to interrupt, but this is exactly my point. If like we in Poland, especially like in Ukraine, you understand Russia as this imperialistic project, then you understand that you need to tame it. So if...
Well, you know, it's now it's commonplace that it's new imperialism, Russia. But within this frame, you also can find very interesting particular points when you look at this idea that it is petrocratia, and you are looking for ways how to deal with this petrocratia. So it is the response is absolutely obvious. Just to cut off their main source of getting this huge money which they spent on war. So reading this book, you understand that if you want to kill this spider, you have to shoot this spider on you should to cut off the line which fits this spider. And what fits this spider is it's exactly carbons. And then what you do. So I already mentioned that Alexander's idea was that they started this war to stop the process of cutting the major source of their income and their rich. So definitely now we have this book brings a kind of diversification of ways of understanding Russia. And sometimes for many people it might be not new because they understood the nature of evil, as other title says. But in this case, it doesn't mean that we should not repeat and repeat and repeat it, and we should consider and reconsider it. Now we have, as far as I understand from different sources of information, some people still trading Russian oil, people from the West. So this means that this system doesn't work, the system of sanctions against this major source of income of Russia, which means that, well, understanding this. So if you know about this, then you are prepared to deal with this. So in this case, the next step is political will. And well, let's see what would be going on. Unfortunately, once again, I'm going back to this. I think this petrocratia in Russia is not the only petrocratia in the world. So look. Of course, in other countries, it is balanced by the production of added values by other sectors of economy, etc. But we have countries not far from us, which also can be called this parasitic, the petrocraties. And then I advise you to read another book, which I mentioned before, the Nature of Evil. And then you have broader picture and broader reasons for pessimism, unfortunately.
Yeah, that's what I thought, but I was really hoping that will not be the last sentence. So I guess I would recommend people watching us and listening to us to simply read the book, because the last chapter is a constructive, hopeful, utopian project for Gaia modernity to overcome and win the anti-modernity Russian project. Thank you for your time and for conversation. Thank you, Professor Kasianov, for joining us. But above all, thank you, Professor Etkind, for the book and thoughts that we have thanks to it. And hopefully when we have a chance to talk again, yeah, we will have better endings to our conversation than in
That would be so good.
Yeah,
thank you so much for having me, and thank you, Georgi, for your very kind words. And thanks, Kritika Polityczna, for translating my book, and I see it as a start of our collaboration.
Good luck with the book.
Yes, I encourage everyone, and I actually am like volunteer promotion department for the book, because I think for Polish people it's also, or maybe even more interesting. We have this discussion in Poland whether we understand Russia better than the ones in the West, because due to our experience and history. But I think we have a certain narratives and ways of thinking and looking at Russia's imperialism. And from my perspective, the ones that you propose are really inspiring and help you understand the danger from Russia even more. Thank you so much.
Dziękuję bardzo.
Dziękujemy bardzo.
Bye.
Bye-bye.